Hello and welcome to the fifth episode of the Cybersecurity podcast. I am Aniket and Dr. and joining me today, I have Dr. Byrd. Hello, Dr. Byrd.
Hey, Aniket. Hello, everyone. How's everybody doing today?
I'm sure everybody is staying tuned to our next episodes and looking forward to what we share next.
Hey, I'm excited about it, Aniket. Anytime you and I get a chance to talk about cybersecurity,
Yeah,
best practices, it's always exciting.
absolutely. This time, the topic of discussion in today's episode is going to be about supply chain security. And in supply chain security, I'm sure somebody who is new to security or cybersecurity might ask, what is supply chain and supply chain security? What are we talking about here? How
Yeah.
would you respond to that, Dr. Bird?
Well, I'd set the context first. When we talk about where technology is today, any businesses, very seldom happens within a single organization's confines. So when we talk about hardware, software, people, right, cloud providers, that's an example of the technology, the ecosystem that goes into driving business. So we have this conversation around vendor and third-party risk and governance, and it's about data privacy and data security, and even third and fourth party risk. So the ultimate goal is to ensure that people, right, these organizations that we are conducting business with share the same security standards, same best practices that you have established in your organization. And that's often driven, depending on the sector, by industry regulations and guidelines and legal obligations. So that's
Yeah.
really setting the context there.
So basically, if I'm hiring an HR company to find me some resumes and do some initial recruitment for me, they become my vendor and they are my supply chain. And
Yeah,
whenever they are doing the hiring activities, if they get hacked through them, I can get hacked as well. So I'm literally inheriting their cyber risks. Is that right?
exactly. That's correct. Now that risk can be cyber related, it can be IT related. It's about business continuity, right? When you talk about HR and the attack on that supply chain, we saw that in the DPKR, right?
Yes.
North Korean actors targeting
Yes.
that IT supply chain, right? That was
Yes.
uh, creating this vulnerability and point of infiltration into tech companies. We
Still
saw
happening.
that still happening. We
Yeah.
saw that with CrowdStrike. This wasn't a cyber related issue, but it was a tech issue that caused
Yeah.
outage and it had vendor cross
Yes.
sector impact, right? We saw SolarWinds, we see Microsoft. So these are examples of this, impact
Hmm.
across
Hmm.
the supply chain, vendor and third party governance. And
Right.
as a business and stakeholder, you're still on the hook to provide product and services for your customers and clients. So
Yeah.
it's important to manage this.
Very true. You talked about certain regulated entities doing this, and I come from one of the regulated entities as well. When I was working in a financial institution and we had many vendors, so we had created a process where we had a questionnaire, and that questionnaire was sent to all of our vendors. They had to fill in the information, provide the responses, and most importantly, they had to give the proof. We had an entire department called TPRM, third party risk management, who was
Yes,
responsible for going through these. And then, if somebody is falling short in following the standards, in fact, sometimes their contracts were revoked as well. What would you
exactly.
agree?
That's a perfect example, Annika. Before signing these contracts, your organization, and this is a cross department impact, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Need to come up with, hey, a baselining of your assessments, your ongoing monitoring, and even contract termination, what that looks like from protecting your organization, protecting data and privacy, right? So, to your point, you have this opportunity to negotiate terms and conditions before signing the contract, making sure, to your point, what those requirements are as far as monitoring, protecting data, having the ability to audit and verify, and even what that looks like for contract termination. So again, this is a governance lifecycle kind of example.
So true. So if there is a new IT manager or a leader of technology, could be a CTO or a CIO or a CISO, in that case, you need to be aware about what are your policies when you're creating a new contract with a vendor? What kind of coverage you have for third party risk management? And how are you going to enforce that?
Exactly, exactly. We see a lot of organizations nowadays talking about outsourcing, trying to maximize resources and utilize them efficiency. So you
Yeah.
may be mitigating one risk, right?
Hmm.
Lowering
Hmm.
costs and some of those type of things, but that does not negate other risks. You may
Right.
create unique risk that need to be addressed, and there are
Huh.
controls for that. But you really have to get a handle on, what it is you're ultimate goals and objectives, and applying the appropriate, risk framework.
So true. In fact, data breaches, cyber incidents that occur on our vendors' premises or about their companies, we need to know about that, right?
Exactly. Exactly. Certain regulation requires maybe 24 hours, 48 hours as far as notification of
Hmm.
a breach or issue that may arise. And then
Yeah.
as a customer or client, you have that obligation to kind of assess and determine what that impact looks like for you. So there is truly this cascading relationship and interdependencies. We call it
Hmm.
vendor or third party risk and governance. It may be fourth party because of these interdependencies. And you see that again in the hardware and software and people. And there's several things that is happening in the U.S. space to kind of address some of those risks. Several years ago, we saw the development of the NIST 800-161. That's the Cybersecurity Supply Chain Risk Management Practice and Standards. And that correlates with the Cybersecurity Framework and the NIST 853 as far as the appropriate controls. We
Hmm.
also saw an evolution of the supply chain bill of materials, right?
Right.
So
Right.
when organizations start integrating some of these cloud service relationships and software, you get a chance to understand where these interdependencies are. As we
Hmm.
know, the cyber criminals are very sophisticated, and
Yeah.
they strategically target some of these, connected relationships because they know it will cascade across the entire ecosystem, the sectors, and
So
globally.
true. So true. And one of the prime examples of that is SolarWinds. The SolarWinds breach happened, and SolarWinds was one software or one product which was used by a wide variety of customers, companies, industries, including the Pentagon, the Revenue Department, also Microsoft, and many other big companies. They are all using that. And when SolarWinds got compromised, and later on people found out that it has been compromised for over a year, now everybody was thinking, how do I investigate that? I remember it was a Friday evening, and coincidentally, in cybersecurity, most of these kind of incidents happen on a Friday evening. Would you agree?
Exactly. Friday evening, the holidays, all of those
Yeah,
where they know that there's going to be this downtime and
yeah,
recovery is going to be challenging. That's a
yeah.
great point, Annika. We see that. And then, in some of our other discussions around the threat landscape, we see even the business email compromise, right? Where cyber criminals understand that we have this uh, connected ecosystem with these third party relationships, fourth party relationships. They will interject, they'll compromise one account, email account, and then redirect payment, redirect the invoicing information to an account
Right.
that they control. So it has a multifaceted approach and impact across your organization. In our podcast, we raise some of these topics, we alert you to the challenges and the risk, but it's very complex to address in a short period of time. But what we hope
Yes.
to take away from this is, hey, develop a strategy, become aware of what's happening in your technology ecosystem, your business ecosystem, because
Yes.
again, it crosses the hardware, software, and people, right?
Yeah.
Power
Yeah.
grid, you name it, right? And the way we get a handle on this is to understand what's happening in our ecosystem, what some of these strategic development and opportunities are within our organization. And then to your point, Aniket, we develop an assessment strategy before we develop and enter these contractual relationships. What is our assessment? What are our requirements as far as security controls that we expect? What is the notification requirement? You get those things pinned down in a contractual point, and then the monitoring, and then the entire tech life cycle. So again,
Reporting. Reporting
yeah,
comes next.
of
Our
course.
management wants to know, hey, you have been monitoring all these vendors. Tell me how are they doing? I used to build a report around similar thing, and we used to present that in our QBR in the quarterly business review, and present that to the CIO and the CTO about how third-party risk management has been doing, how many access reviews have we performed. And those reports were always appreciated by the top management, because until then, they were only policies. They did not know how these policies look like in action.
Exactly. And that goes into to your point, Aniket, not only to the leadership, but it goes to the various stakeholders as well. In the
Yeah.
US, we have the Securities Exchange Commission. You have your
Yes.
annual reports that organizations have to report on their health.
Yeah.
How is the organization doing? You
Right.
address risk, financial impact, things that are happening throughout the year, and what that
S-
means for that organization's financial health and well-being. So there's
So true.
definitely a bucket of category in there on risk
Yeah.
and cyber risk as well. We have the 8K, 10K reports, as well as the annual reports that are available at the Securities Exchange Commission.
Yeah.
And you see that for these organizations. So that's a great point there, Aniket.
So, to all the listeners, if you want to put this knowledge into action, in that case, go and look up the 8K or the 10K report for the publicly traded companies, and look out for the third party risk management. Look out for the cybersecurity related segments and read what they are doing, so you know what is being covered by them. Would you agree to that, Dr. Byrd?
I agree. That's what that information is there for, is to provide the public with a understanding, a wellness of what's happening in that corporation's ecosystem, from the annual reports that they produce to the 8Ks to the 10Ks that are event specific around cyber and risk related issues. That's
Yes.
a great way of understanding what's happening from a particular organizational standpoint. And then, of course, staying abreast of what's happening in the threat landscape. We talked about the importance of staying connected with different threat intel groups and corporations and organizations. That
Yeah.
way you understand what some of the cyber criminals are doing and targeting. And that way you can make sure you can address any vulnerability management issues. You can apply and evaluate the appropriate security controls. It's about taking this proactive step to cyber and managing risk. So we're talking
Right.
about risk in a big sense, not just cyber, but risk in an entire ecosystem.
So true. And I'm sure by now, the listeners or the viewers of this podcast would be thinking, when are these guys going to talk about AI? Because AI is everywhere. Why is AI not a part of this conversation so far? So let's bring it in, Dr. Bird.
Well, AI is with everything, right? So again, we
Yeah.
talked about hardware, software, and
Yeah.
people, right? So whether you're dealing with Microsoft, the entire Microsoft suite, the ecosystem, from our
Yes.
Outlook to SharePoint and
Yeah.
our PowerPoint, then we have Copilot, right? So again, you want to understand what that technology is doing inside of your ecosystem. We shared some kind of privilege scope and creep. There was conversations in the news that when Microsoft was onboarding some of the Copilot features, it had access to everything that was in the ecosystem, that was in that Microsoft stack. And that may have impact on privacy, security, and things of that nature for different business groups and things of that nature. So that's something that you want to talk about. We talk about shadow AI all of the time, and we talk about some of
Yes.
the risk and threats about that. That's
Yeah.
another
Yeah.
example of a third party or fourth party software that is being integrated knowingly or unknowingly into your organization. And as we started our conversation, we talked about the data privacy and security impacts around vendor management and third party governance. When you have associates, employees, users accessing, shadow AI, that means you haven't gone through those contract negotiations about
Yeah.
security controls. And like you
Yeah.
talked about, the ability to audit and test and evaluate where that data
Yes.
is going, how long you're storing data.
Yeah,
Do we
yeah.
have the appropriate controls around that data?
So
Without
true.
those conversations, you just can't assume that somebody else, a third party, will take care of those things for you. And again, AI is an example of that. It's a software that's being introduced into your organization, or hardware if you're talking about IoT of things, right?
Yes, yes, so true. If I was the CISO of a company, here is what I would do. I would pick up the list of all the vendors that I have, put a column against them, AI integration. If they are using AI and it impacts our relationship with them, whether it could be an HR, it could be any kind of relationship. If that AI is being used in the business that we are doing together, then that AI implementation must be put to test or evaluation. And that way, I truly know if that AI risk coming from the vendor, have I evaluated it very well or not? And I'm sure that this testing will always, whenever you do testing on a variety of sources, some new patterns emerge. And these new patterns can then be used to build our own learnings on how AI is being adopted by our supply chain. What are your thoughts on this, Dr. Byrd? What would
That's
you do
that's
if you were the
that's it.
CISO of a company?
I would remind my team that, hey, when we're focusing on data privacy and security, we have to focus on our vendor and third party risk governance. I'd remind everybody on my team, just like we opened with,
Hmm.
that modern business and technology does
Hmm.
not happen in a silo, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not within our boundaries. We have to focus on hardware, software, and people. And
Yes.
then when we come up with our strategy for, to your point, developing understanding of of vendors that are in our ecosystem, in our business, we can have the assessment and strategize about the appropriate questions that we're going to ask. Are they invoking or have they applied the appropriate security controls that we deem appropriate to protect our data, our privacy, our security for our users, our associates, and our stakeholders?
So
And then
true.
we move forward appropriately.
Right. Right. I think today we covered a lot of things about the supply chain security, the reasons behind it, how to do it. And in the closing, maybe if you can give a couple of points about careers in this domain, that'll be great. So we can wrap up this episode with opportunities for our viewers as to how can somebody make a career? Is this a field where someone can make a career?
Of course, Aniket, every facet of the cybersecurity, the technology, the risk ecosystem that we talked about, is burgeoning. It's
Mm.
burgeoning because businesses, again, is changing how we function.
Yeah.
So to your point, whether you say, "Hey, I'm into or interested in, third-party vendor management and that audit security process," that's something that you can get into. There
Right.
are guidelines and standards out there. If you're new to the space, I shared with you the NIST 800-161 that's out there. There's also the supply chain bill of materials, which has been developed by the U.S. government. Well, it's really a consortium, not only the U.S. government, but NSA and the Five Eyes have been participating in this
Oh,
because this is a
okay.
attack vector for the entire ecosystem. If you are into DoD contracts, they are part of the audit and management phase that you have to participate in from that standpoint, making sure you're protecting those classified and sensitive information and systems. So again, the spectrum is wide open. There are plenty of opportunities for you to learn about the space of third-party vendor risk management. Uh, and we just encourage you, as always, to continue to read and grow. A great place to start is with the NIST. They have these workshops and consortiums when they're developing new standards. And I think the 161 is being updated or has recently been updated. Not only that, but the AI cyber profile is being developed and is certainly part of that conversation, as Aniket and I discussed.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of
We talked about with the
headwinds.
previous episode.
We talked about that.
Yeah.
We
And just to clarify, everyone, we are not getting paid by NIST.
No, we're not. We always talk about NIST, and And I think, again, they do a great job for what they do. They bring the entire global community together
Yeah.
where you have an opportunity to chime in and say, hey, this is how I think the business or this technology or the security controls need to be
Yeah.
applied or developed. Where else does that happen?
So
Oftentimes
true.
in cyber and IT, you get what you get. You unpack a box or a server or whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So true.
Technology, it is what it is. You just unpack it, you plug it in, and you go, right?
Yes. Maybe I'm going to start manifesting this, but maybe one day we may have somebody from NIST joining us on our podcast and talking about it from their perspective as well. What do you think about that?
I think that'd be great. I think that'd be a great opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Byrd, discussing about the supply chain security. Thank you so much, all the viewers and listeners, depending on how you are listening to this episode. It's been a pleasure speaking with you in this channel, and we look forward to meet you again in episode number 6. And let's go deep dive into security. Let's learn some new things in every podcast. Thank you.